Hello everyone, welcome back to YK Reviews. Welcome back to the continuation of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. As we're continuing off, we're going with Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy's Dead, the sixth movie into the franchise, so let's get into it here. Now, I'll be completely honest, this was really brutal to rewatch. I'm definitely in the majority when this is one of the worst movies in the franchise, and when I do the tier ranking video, sneak peek, this is definitely going as like the worst one, the bottom one of the list. Just so dull and so boring, and the characters themselves too. But I'll let you be the judge of that, because if you are new to the channel, definitely consider hitting that sub button, hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, so you're not missing out on these types of videos, along with like other videos we have, like tier ranking videos, weekly entertainment news videos. But when it comes to this movie, when it comes to Freddy's Dead, this movie starts off where it's explaining to you that this movie is taking place 10 years from the events of the previous movie. Freddy has essentially killed off all the kids in Elm Street and all the teenagers, leaving just one person, and that one person who's being called John Doe throughout the whole movie. We get introduced to him sitting in this plane. There's some turbulence in there. He's freaking out. The plane starts just shaking a lot. The roof of the plane opens up and he just ends up flying up. He's falling out of the plane, and honestly, the visual effects just don't hold up in this movie. I'm going to say that right now, but I'm not going to hold that too much against the movie. But as he's falling down, he lands in this house, which then causes him to wake up. And when he does wake up, he sees that the house is literally flying out of the sky, which when he looks out the window, he sees Freddy Krueger on a broomstick looking like a witch, flying around the house for some reason. As the house does end up crashing, this John Doe character is trying to run away, trying to escape from Freddy, only to get hit by a bus that is being driven by Freddy, which causes him to crash from one scenery to another scenery, where he ends up in a desert, all lost and confused. So then we get introduced to like the main characters that we're going to be following throughout the movie. They're in this foster home, I believe it was. I honestly can't remember what they were calling it, but you get introduced to like the caseworker called Maggie. These three kids, one of the kids, Spencer, is getting shit from his dad, and then the other two are having these like sparring sessions. One has like hearing problems, which he's got his hearing aid on, and the other one, she's like doing boxing sessions. They end up picking up this John guy who's got no memory of what happened or his like identity or anything like that. He gets like flashbacks, flash memories, flash dreams, what you want to call it, about his like other version of himself, telling him to like find him or wake him up. And honestly, I'm going to say this right now, nothing really comes out of that. Like, there was no really exploration or story building or payoff when it comes to that particular like sequence of events with him remembering his other version of himself. But this character Maggie takes John to Springwood to try and maybe get his memory back, and those three kids that I mentioned end up tagging along, get into the van, and they end up going into Springwood, where they run into this carnival fair thing, whatever you want to call it. They notice that there's no kids around. They notice that all these people are just moving around like zombies, basically. So when this Maggie character tells these three kids to get in the van and go back while her and John go exploring, this trio are in this van. They're stuck in this loop because they can't escape. They end up going to the stop sign. They're going just round in circles, basically just going crazy, going out of their minds, not being able to escape Springwood. And so eventually, like, they even take turns driving, still end up going in circles. By this time, it's like nightfall, so they end up finding this house to stay at. When they enter the house, it sort of just like explodes into a different house, which that house ends up being Freddy's house. So they're inside Freddy's old house. Carlos, who the one that had the hearing aid, goes and finds a bedroom. He lays down in bed to fall asleep, only to wake up and find himself in like these old hallway apartment motel looking place. It's pretty much the same house, but he's just like in this hallway where he just sees a whole bunch of people roaming around. He finds a brick wall where he can't escape, and when he turns around, he sees his mother, who says that she's going to beat him up. His mother ends up turning into Freddy, and Freddy uses this big ass Q-tip to just poke it inside his ear and then cuts off one of his ears. This whole sequence then turns into like the famous boiler room that Freddy's always in. So Freddy tosses him a hearing aid, which he puts in, and it sort of turns into like the spider thingy, which amplifies his earring. And what Freddy does is he throws the nails to the floor to really just like emphasize the noise of the nails. He gets this chalkboard and he ends up like scratching the chalk, which, I'll be honest, that sound effect hurts my teeth so much, so I'm going to quickly move past that scene, because eventually Carlos's head explodes, killing Carlos off. However, while all this is going on, so like with this Maggie and this John Doe character, I'll be honest, like, it storyline just very dull and boring. because they're going around town, they end up going into this school where they find out like that everything plastered on the board and everything like that, all the events took place within that 10-year period. And they eventually get like this flashback of Freddy Krueger without the mask, like before he got burnt, and they come to find out that Freddy Krueger had a kid. And so then they end up going into, I think it was just another room or another house with this other teacher, and they find this drawing of K. Krueger, which this John guy assumes that it's him. He is Freddy Krueger's kid, which, I'll be completely honest, when it comes to this whole storyline, like I said, it was just very dull. Like, if you want to bring up the fact that Freddy had a kid, there was just a lot more ways to bring it up, and the direction that they went with when it comes to this, and even like the characters too, like, I don't know if it was just me, but with the characters, whenever they were like delivering their lines, just felt very forced, felt like they were reading off a script, so you don't really engage too much in this sort of storyline. But we're exploring like Freddy's backstory with these two characters. But they eventually meet up with Tracy, like the girl from the trio, because she couldn't find Carlos. She ends up leaving the house, gets in the van, finds John and Maggie, and tells her that she can't find Carlos, so they have to go back and look for him. Meanwhile, that Spencer, the other, like the third member of this trio, is watching TV. You get a really weird cameo from Johnny Depp, who is talking about how eggs is like your brain almost because of the drugs that people are taking. And honestly, it was really weird, but great to see Johnny Depp in this as a cameo. Never in a million years was I expecting him to return to the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, but he's there, but he ends up getting smacked in the face by a pan from Freddy Krueger. And then you have this, not one of the most amazing sequences, but one of the most enjoyable sequences in the movie, just because of how much fun you can see Robert Englund having as Freddy Krueger in this. Like, he, in this movie, as much as I despise this movie, as much as I find this movie dull and boring, Robert Englund's performance, you can really tell he was having such a fun time in his performance as Freddy Krueger. So he makes Spencer turn into this video game. It looks like a Mario video game from like the 80s. And so like as Freddy's playing with the controller, he's taking care of Spencer. You see in like the video game form, Freddy Krueger, like the video game version of Freddy Krueger, is stamping on Spencer's stomach. But then in real life situation, you just see the stomach going up and down, like basically breathing in and breathing out very deeply. And you just see him, and honestly, like I said, as much as Freddy Krueger was having a great time, the performances here, like you've got Spencer in the video game going like jumping up and down, but then like in real life, it just looks so stupid and ridiculous with him jumping up and down in real life. So then John and Tracy decide to enter the dream. So they enter the dream, they find Freddy playing a video game, they end up breaking the controller. However, Freddy has a power glove that he can still control Spencer with. So he ends up making Spencer fall down the stairs and this hole at the bottom of the stairs, which Spencer ends up falling inside, killing off Spencer. And then you have Tracy fighting off. Now, I criticized Alice as like fighting with Freddy coming out of nowhere, but with this one you kind of get the backstory with Tracy, this character in the beginning of the movie when we first get introduced to her, knowing some kickboxing, doing some fighting sequences, fighting training, sparring, that kind of stuff. So she ends up coming face to face with Freddy. She ends up kicking him in these nuts. Honestly, who wrote this shit? And as Freddy is about to like slice her, she ends up waking herself up, manages to escape Freddy's grasp in the dream sequence. However, John is still asleep, so as they're in the van, John's dream sequence is similar to the situation of the opening sequence where he's crashing out of this house. He's flying out of this house. There's a label on his chest where it pulls him, and he ends up having this parachute where Freddy is on that parachute. John is basically confronting Freddy about how he's a kid, but only is to reveal that John isn't the kid, but he's the one that led Freddy to his own kid. Ends up slicing the parachute, and John ends up flying and landing into like this board with spikes on it. So he ends up killing John in the process. As we find out that you put two and two together, we come to find out that of course Maggie is the one that's his kid and not John. So as they return to like the foster home, foster care place, they realize that nobody remembers Spencer or Carlos or like John's character or anything like that other than one of the doctors there. And he's actually been in control of his dreams the whole time. He has this thing where he can wake up. He's got these machinery thingies tied to his head where it allows him to wake up just in time. So they decide to use that with Maggie so that she can confront Freddy. And side note, a bit of backstory too is that we come to find out that Freddy actually was beating up his wife because she found all like the newspaper clippings and his gloves and stuff like that. And we even get like Maggie as a kid, as a little girl, finding that same thing. So there's a couple of dream sequences, especially when it comes to like Tracy. Tracy sees her dad in front of her. She ends up beating the crap out of him with like one of those kettles, the thing that you boil water with. very popular in the UK, she ends up beating the dad up only for him to be revealed as Freddy Krueger. And so before he's able to attack her, she ends up burning herself to wake her up, similar to like Nancy from the first movie. And then with the doctor, again, like I mentioned, he's able to use his machinery to wake himself up. He actually grabs a piece of Freddy's sweater and realizes that they can actually bring Freddy to real life. Basically the same situation as Nancy from the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, the original movie here. So they send Maggie in to confront her father in this whole third act sequence, and honestly a really like tame, weak third act when you've got this face to face with Freddy and her, because during this whole dream sequence events as well is that you focus on his backstory about how he's a kid, how people are just like making fun of him, how his stepdad or his dad or whatever it was would beat him and he wasn't feeling the effects or anything like that. She tries to get him out of the dream sequence, but he's not in her arms or in her grasp or whatever. But when they find out in the basement that he's there, he's basically the unburnt version of himself, saying that it wasn't his fault. And then once again you get that confrontation, Freddy versus Maggie, and really one of the weakest third acts final battle in the whole franchise, because they're basically doing a Halloween Ends where they are just like tussling with one another on the floor like little kids, fighting over like the classic glove, the Freddy glove itself. He's like strangling her, but she ends up using the glove and like starts stabbing him. She throws these knives and throwing stars on Freddy, and then she ends up putting the glove and just stabbing Freddy, and then putting a piece of dynamite on him to eventually have him explode, killing off Freddy once and for all, with the final line saying that Freddy's dead. And honestly, I wish I had more than two hands to just face palm as much as possible, because that was just such a anticlimactic, disappointing ending to the franchise as we thought it would be at the time. And it's just a very tame movie with a disappointing ending, disappointing characters, disappointing kills even. Like, for me, it was a really rough rewatch when it comes to this movie. And like I mentioned, the only saving grace was Robert Englund's performance in this movie, because you can see how much enjoyment he's getting out of this. But other than that, just really not an enjoyable movie whatsoever. So I want to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you have seen this movie, is this the worst in the franchise? Have you seen worse? Let me know in the comment section down below. And again, if you are new to the channel, definitely consider subscribing and hitting that like button. But keep an eye out on the channel, because we are going to be doing Wes Craven's New Nightmare along with Freddy vs. Jason and the remake version of Nightmare on Elm Street, plus that tier ranking video coming out on Halloween. So definitely keep an eye out on all the upcoming videos here. But I thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. This is YK Reviews.